I'm Sarah Beck with Pacific Horticulture. I'm here at Philoli in Woodside, California, where staff are helping us to share questions from our gardening and allied professional audience on what they want to know about managing drought in the garden. Our expert panelists include climate-ready landscape plants researchers, extension specialists, nursery, and other horticulture field professionals.
Is there a reliable way to know when plants need water?
One is watch, right? Look at your landscape. Are plants wilting? Are they dying? Is the grass getting brown if you still have grass? You know, what's going on there? Those are good signs that maybe your system needs to be juiced a little. And we say this, like he said, smart controllers aren't so smart. So you can do everything perfectly. You're probably still going to have to tweak. Mm-hmm. And that tweak is going to be based on your observation. And another good tool that we always tell people, and I learned this from Lauren, is get yourself a nice long screwdriver. And, you know, you can go out and stick it in the ground in various places. And if it only goes in an inch, then that means that it's really dry, you know, right? And if it'll go in really fast, I mean, you can see the moisture on the end of it. And so you don't really need to water until, you know, it's fairly dry. That's the goal, is to really allow dry down. And for most of the plants that we put in a landscape or that we recommend for a landscape, you want to have a period of dry down. Keeping them too moist is going to lead to disease issues. And the tricky part is that too much water and too little water can look very similar.
Yeah.
So, you know, you want to be paying attention to the soil. That will tell you whether it's too dry or too wet. And that the screwdriver trick is one of the best things that I know. So if you don't have a soil probe, if you've got a soil probe, you know, use your soil probe.
There's a critical point where plants may not recover from drought stress. And that if it is in woody plants, and if the conduit that connects the plants, if it is broken, and it cannot be repaired. So it's called cavitation or embolism, where, like, you can think of it as a straws that connects from the roots and from the soil to the roots to the top. And it needs to be filled with water so they can continue to suck the water and continue to provide water to the leaf so they can be turgid. If that's broken and it cannot be repaired or refilled, then plants will have a hard time, and they cannot go, it can get to the point where you cannot really get any more water. So I don't think you want to wait for that point. It gets to the point, so it's best to water before it gets to the point. Now, how do we know the plants are getting to that point, right? And when you see the wilting, it's often too late. So I think one thing that I can think of is when you have a plant, a mix of plant, that you will have some plants that are more sensitive to drought and more vulnerable than others. And if you see sensitive plants that are showing symptoms, then it's likely it's time to water, right? So, but the more resistant plants will do still fine in that point. So maybe have a mix of plants where you can have some sort of indicator plant.
I have something I call the Canary Test. And the Canary Test is, I encourage people to do it once a quarter. You run your irrigation, you pick up a zone, you do zone by zone, you run your irrigation for the normal amount of time. You mark on your calendar what date you do it, and then you turn that zone off. And then you watch the plants that are irrigated by that, in that zone, by that valve, for the first plant that starts to look a little droopy. Okay, we don't want our plants to look droopy, but we want to know how long that's going to take. Droopy means it's water stressed. So if it takes 14 days for the first plant to look droopy, then set your irrigation up to run every 12 days or every 13 days. If it takes a month for the first plant in that zone to look droopy, then you set your irrigation to run maybe every 27 or 28 days. If it takes a week for the plant to look droopy, for the first one to look, the canary, right? We're talking about the canary in the coal mine. That's where the analogy is. If it takes a week, then you set the irrigation up in that zone to run every 6 days. And you do that once a quarter because it depends on what season we're in. And you do it for every zone. And after you've done each zone, for a year, or maybe you repeat it the second year, then you have a really good sense of how long you need to run that zone to meet the needs of the plants in that zone. Of course, it's predicated on the assumption that you have hydrozoned the plants. So you have all the high water plants watered by one valve in one zone, all the medium water plants in one valve, one zone, all the low water plants in one valve, one zone. Maybe it's 3 valves and 3 zones, but all the low water together, the medium water together, and the high water together. That's a really good way to begin to understand how often your irrigation needs to run per zone based on the plant's responses or reactions.
I like that idea. I got to throw a caveat on that, though. In my world, I deal with just woody plants, and especially in our dry summer climates, a lot of them are broadleaf evergreens that are physiologically, they're isohydric, so they're never going to wilt. You're going to see cavitation, you're going to see dieback, you're going to see carbon starvation before you ever see a leaf wilt on a live oak. So for trees and a lot of shrubs, that's not quite going to work, but I like that idea for sort of the lower layer.
We encourage people to be knowledgeable about where they water and how deep they water. And of course, the recommendations are that for ground cover bedding plants and such, you water to a depth of 6 to 12 or 15 inches. For shrubs, 1 to 2 feet deep, and for trees, also 2 to 3 feet, but 3 feet or a little more if possible, because that's where the majority of your root system is. And so in the last couple of years, I have barely given a talk where I don't take my little tool, this metal rod that is 3 feet long with me, and show people how to push that into the ground and try to see after irrigation, is the soil wet enough? And then of course, teaching people where is the root system. It is, depending on if you have a shrub or a tree, inside, outside, the drip line and such. So those are the items that we're trying to teach people. And then of course, irrigating, if they have an automatic irrigation system, adjusting at least 4 times a year to the changes in the seasonal demand.
I really agree what Ursula said that, and then it really depends on different plant. But I want to add a comment is that that's the reason why we're doing this research, because every plant requires different irrigation rates. And just like Ursula saying, we also test some native plants in our plots, and then they are just fine by only receive 1 irrigation during the whole summer. So doing this research will be really important to understand how much they need instead of just using the wilting or using their morphological change. Because sometimes just like if you see them wilting, probably that it's a little bit too late. Also, we provide the irrigation, they still can cause some not reversible damage to them. So
like Ursula mentioned, digging. So by digging, there are a lot of ways to find out the moisture. One is a very easy approach would be how easily can you penetrate a screwdriver or something as such in the soil. Like if it goes really like easily, then you assume that the soil is wet. But if it's like hard to push it inside, you can assume it's kind of dry. And with the adjusting of the irrigation controller, that's very crucial because we have different evapotranspirative demand, right? The water evaporates differently in different months. So you need to adjust it.
The WOLVA's database provides plant factors as ranges, such as 0.1 to 0.3. What number within that range should one use to calculate estimated total water use?
Oh, should is one of those things. So, the practical person would say, use the one that gets you the lowest total for your permitting. I typically recommend that people use the middle of that range.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Just
0.2
hit the
for
middle.
low, 0.5, because typically that's typically what they're going to be irrigated at, right? So controllers are not so fine-tuned that you can go in and say, this plant palette uses 0.4 versus 0.6. Most controllers are probably using a logarithm that says, or that it's using something that's going to calculate it in the middle of that range.
Yeah.
For the high, moderate, and low plants.
And with a new Muello, there's nothing that will that you could adjust to 0.55.
Right.
I don't know why they put that second digit in there. It's
If I have a plant that's low water use and I have that range to work with, then if I have that plant in a very windy or sunny or a place that with more heat, it's going to need a little more water, and I have flexibility in that range to use the 0.3 and still be in the low water needs arena, that bracket. If my plant is going to be more protected or is in a place that dries out more slowly or has more water retaining soils, then I can dial it down and not have to budget for so much water, still within the low water use category, but I can dial it down to 0.1 so that when I do my calculations for my water budget, I'm not budgeting for more water than I need, and I'm not budgeting for less water than I need, even though my plant is a low water needs plant.
Several people asked if there are easy-to-use resources for determining how much water is needed on their gardens.
As a starting place, a lot of water agencies in California provide watering schedule advice on their websites. A lot of them don't go into soil. Their service areas might be small and it might be only one major soil type. I did see in the city of Santa Barbara, they have theirs by zip code because their city is really different because they're by the ocean or up in the mountains. So I would suggest, as a starting point, go look to the water supplier that anybody has onto their conservation or efficiency webpage and see if they have advice. A lot of them will have WaterWise house calls where they'll come out and help you. They'll look at your sprinklers, do a survey. Usually it's free if they offer it. So it's worth looking to see what the water supplier has for resources.
Typical watering advice is water deeply and infrequently, but trials during droughts in Australia have suggested pulse irrigation, watering little and often. What do you think?
I couldn't find anything about landscaping. I found everything about agriculture. And landscaping and agriculture are completely different things. We're dealing with monocultures usually in agriculture and landscaping, even in our home gardens. They're pretty mixed trees and food crops. And the purpose is to, from what I gather, from what I read, is to eliminate stress from drying out. And they pulse it so the plants have moisture, and then they pulse it so it dries out so they don't create anaerobic conditions, and then they get it wet again. And so they want to keep that root zone evenly moist all the time to eliminate stress so the plant can put all its energy into producing whatever crop is intended. And we know with landscaping, we want them to grow deep roots, and they're not going to do that if they're babied with pulses. So they need to have moisture when they're new. The root zone needs to stay moist, but they need to be trained like they would in nature to push their roots down and out.
That also makes sense because if you think about the difference between most agricultural crops are generally annuals,
Yes,
so they're not going to have deep roots, whereas our landscape plants are mostly perennial shrubs, trees, etc., that are bigger plants to start with, but also permanent plants. And so we want them to make those deep roots.
Would killing down grass with black material or cardboard kill the microbiome?
I think it's thoughtful that they're thinking beyond what they can see. The microbiome is vast beyond our understanding. And from what we know, it's quite resilient. So there are over winter, over summer structures that a lot of microorganisms will go into that will return. The mobile ones will move down. So if we're thinking of worms, I guess that's not micro, but other microbiomes will move down. The microbiome will change for sure. If there are bacteria and fungus and nematodes that are associated with turf that wouldn't be associated with their plants. So it'll change. Yeah, for sure it will change. Clear plastic will be heating the soil, so raising the temperatures to kill the grass. Black plastic will be smothering, so blocking out the light, probably also raising the temperature, but not as much as clear. And then cardboard will be smothering and suppressing it. Some fungus people like cardboard because it creates a habitat underneath it. Whether that's beneficial or not, I don't know. You know what I mean? So, but they're all doing different things. This person would probably want to use cardboard. If they're thinking in these steps, beyond it, then they should get out some sheets of cardboard and lay it out and landscape staple it down and go.
I want to say a couple things. The solarizing is something that you really got to know what you're doing to actually get it to temperature to have an impact. So if somebody wants to remove, and I put that in air quotes because I don't want them to take their lawn out and just remove all that organic material in the topsoil, I would suggest going to londagarden.org or Googling sheet mulching and looking into that. I think that's what they're talking about when they brought up cardboard. But sheet mulching is not going to cook your soil. It's going to let it die and the turf grass die and decompose in place, and it's all kinds of good.